How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video, we're going to focus on the Atlantic hurricane season and multiple tropical waves that have the potential of developing into Tropical Storm Fiona in the very near future. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. So let's begin by taking a look at the water vapor imagery for the entirety of the Northern Atlantic, and we do have this tropical wave now moving west towards the Caribbean at this time. However, this doesn't have any chance of developing, at least within the near future, as there's just too much dry and stable air just ahead of it. So it doesn't seem like it's gonna have any sort of possibility of developing into Tropical Storm Fiona. However, this tropical wave right here does potentially have a shot of developing into Tropical Storm Fiona, as conditions should become more favorable as this heads further eastward, and we have other tropical waves that have a possibility also of developing into a tropical storm that aren't shown here yet, but the computer models are leaning more towards developing those tropical waves in the more long-term future. So taking a look at the GFS model for when it comes to the water vapor, and we do see that there's still a lot of dry air surrounding the main development region at this time. And if I were to continue to move forward, there is a possibility that a tropical wave could develop just off the northeast coast. So if I were to continue to move forward, we do see a low pressure system develop right around the 6-day mark, which is between Saturday and Sunday, going into this weekend, where we do see a low pressure system develop, as it's pretty much a derivative from this cold front that's moving through, that's bringing some sort of a little bit of vorticity towards the northeastern portion of the Gulf of Mexico and along the southeast coast, where we could see just enough vorticity for a low-level center to develop off the Carolina coast, where we could see Tropical Storm Fiona develop off of that vorticity. Now, there's still, of course, a high amount of uncertainty regarding this disturbance, because we need to see how much vorticity will move into the southeast by this weekend's time to really determine if this does have a chance of developing just enough convection for this to develop a well-defined low-level center. But we do see the GFS model wanting to develop a low pressure system just off the east coast, which is definitely quite interesting. Of course, it's very weak. It's not necessarily a very strong tropical storm if this were to develop into tropical storm. In fact, this might not even be considered a tropical storm, even with this millibar pressure at around 1,010 millibars. But it's always something to be aware of when we see a well-defined low pressure system like this just off the southeast coast. It's always something to take note of, because the forecast could easily change within the next 5 to 6 days. So we could see conditions become more favorable than anticipated between now and until this low pressure system actually does develop. So it's at least something to be aware of at this time. As of right now, it seems like the GFS model is bringing a decent amount of wind shear over this storm, but it could actually help it a little bit, especially for the winds on the eastern side, because of course that would mean the upper level winds and the lower level winds and the movement of this storm would be moving the same direction. So that could definitely enhance the eastern side of the winds on the eastern side of this storm, just enough for enough convection to occur on the eastern side for this to develop a small and well-defined center of circulation. And it might deal with a little bit of dry air, and not only that, a little bit of instability. So even if this does have the wind speed to be considered a tropical storm, it might not be considered tropical after all if there's a little bit too much instability pretty much carrying the weight with this low pressure system. Because of course, if this storm is pretty much only being supported by baroclinic influences, and it's not tropical at that point, since it needs that very cold Arctic air to maintain its storm's wind speed and convection. But if this were to develop at least a small, well-defined center of circulation without much help from baroclinic influences, then this would be considered a tropical storm, or at the very least a sub tropical storm. So we just need to wait and see how the conditions will play out. Really depends on how much vorticity this cold front moving through the eastern United States will bring to the southeastern United States. Will really determine if we'll see Tropical Storm Fiona develop out of this. So make sure to just be aware of that around the southeast head into this weekend. But in terms of other disturbances we're watching in the Atlantic, of course, we do have this one just off the African coast at this time. So if we were to take a look at what the GFS model is forecasting when it comes to that tropical cyclone, we do see that the GFS model also isn't very confident that this will develop into much of anything, because again, there's just a high amount of stability in the main Devot region, and it's due in part due to the positive MJO pattern we're seeing right now for a lot of the Northern Atlantic, which promotes more stability and makes conditions less favorable for tropical cyclone genesis. So as a result, we aren't seeing just enough instability to where this low pressure system could really enhance its convection for this to have a good chance of developing into a tropical storm. There's still time for the forecast to iron out, but based on how it looks right now, it seems like there's just a lot of dry air that's preventing tropical cyclone activity, that's expected to inhibit tropical cyclone activity for the next week, which is certainly good news. And it's not something that's much different from what we've been seeing from a vast majority of the hurricane season, which is certainly good news and has made it so far one of the quietest years we've seen in a while when it comes to the Atlantic hurricane season. And hopefully it stays that way for the entirety, but we can't rule out it could become more active in the future, especially when we do see a negative MJO pattern move through, which could promote more convection and more of an upward motion in the Atlantic for more tropical cyclone genesis to occur. But we do see the GFS model isn't very confident in developing this thanks due to the high amount of dry air, and same goes for the European model, where it just expects these tropical waves to fizzle out in the midst of this dry air. So as a result, it seems like tropical cyclone activity is unlikely within next week. Tropical Storm Fiona is unlikely. We need to see if that'll remain the same, the forecast, but based on what we're seeing right now, it seems like the dry air will just be too much for these two tropical waves to handle, which is certainly good news, and hopefully it stays that way. And if I were to move on to the more long-term future, there is a possibility we could see maybe tropical cyclone development along the Gulf of coast in and around the Gulf of Mexico, as well as southwestern Caribbean, as the GFS model is forecasting a high amount of moisture to hover around the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean at this time, and there is a possibility we could see just enough lift and moisture to where maybe we do see a more well-defined low pressure system that could develop into a tropical storm. At this point, the GFS model isn't expecting anything over the next 5 days, but if we were to move more into the long-term future between the 7 to 9 day mark, we do see a well-defined low pressure system develop right around the southern Gulf of Mexico. And if I were to move on into the even more long-term future, we see quite a formidable tropical storm, but of course is way too far in the future to really take this as completely factual. We still need to iron out the forecast. There's still a lot of days for that to happen, but we just need to be aware of the amount of moisture that's located right around the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico for the entirety of the week and going into next week as well, because it could easily be a recipe for a tropical storm to develop right around the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, we do have a higher possibility in the Eastern Pacific. We just need to wait and see if this moisture will deal with a lot of land interaction. And of course, we're going to need to see if we'll see a low pressure system that will be able to develop despite the amount of moisture there is, because sometimes a little bit too much moisture like this would make it a little bit harder for a single low pressure system to intensify into a tropical storm, because there's so much moisture and lift in one area that it's going to be hard to compete with other surface lows for energy, as there's only so much energy that a low pressure system could absorb. So we're just going to need to wait and see, but we're just going to need to be aware of the amount of moisture that the GFS model is bringing towards the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean for the next week or two, because that's definitely could be a recipe for another tropical storm to form, which the GFS model does want to develop something right around by next week. So definitely something to keep in mind. Taking a look at the MJO forecast over the next 2 weeks, we do see that we're deep in a positive MJO pattern, which has definitely inhibited tropical cyclones from developing by the amount of dry air we're seeing. We're seeing such a strong downward motion in the atmosphere that it's definitely inhibiting convection from a high amount of convection from occurring, and really inhibiting any sort of tropical cyclones from developing. But we do see that by the week 2 forecast, we enter back into a negative MJO pattern for the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. And that's around the time where we'll begin to transition to the part of the hurricane season where more tropical cyclones are more likely to develop in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico rather than the main development region as we enter the month of October. So it's definitely something to keep in mind as well, that this negative MJO pattern is expected to move in, which could increase tropical cyclone development by within 2 weeks from now. So taking a look at what the ensemble members are stating, we do have some ensemble members wanting to develop this next tropical wave, but the good news is that it wants to take it up north, not really impacting any sort of land, which is certainly good news. We also see some low pressure system develop just off South Carolina coast, but again, they're very weak. So, and another couple of low pressure systems develop right around the southwestern Caribbean. But again, they're all very weak, which is certainly good news, but still something to be aware of with the amount of the amount of ensemble members agreeing that a low pressure system will develop, because maybe that forecast could change, or we could see something more formidable form in the Caribbean. So at least something to be aware of in the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean by next week. Now, taking a look at my forecast when it comes to the areas where you could potentially see Tropical Storm Fiona. At this point, it seems like this tropical wave right here will be unlikely that it will develop into Tropical Storm Fiona, and if it does, it'll still move out to sea, which is certainly good news. There might be that slight possibility by this weekend just off the Carolina coast, depending on how much vorticity there is. I'll keep you guys updated regarding that, and maybe a possibility by next week, which we're definitely going to need to pay close attention to that as well. But anyways, guys, I think you guys watch and make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content, and I hope you guys have a great day.